Hello, pre-algebra students. In this lesson of chapter 11, we're going to be talking about congruent triangles. The word congruent can be abbreviated with an equal sign and a squiggly on top. That's the abbreviation for the word congruent. The word triangle is abbreviated with a little triangle. So if we want them to be more than one triangle, we put a little S behind our triangle. So this is the abbreviation for congruent triangles. Let's make sure we understand what congruent means. It means they have the exact same size and the same shape. So I've talked to you before about similar triangles, and I talk about my hand and my daughter's hand would be similar. But if I take my own two hands and place them together, they should be the exact same size and the same shape. Now, we've also, when we talked about similar, we talked about corresponding parts. Well, if I'm talking about hands, my pinky corresponds with my pinky and my thumb corresponds with my thumb, and so on and so forth. So for congruent triangles, corresponding sides should be congruent. They're congruent. And corresponding angles are congruent. So corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. When you get to high school geometry, your teacher is going to call that CPCTC. Now think about it. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And that's just a nice abbreviation for all those words. Corresponding parts. So if I tell you that these two triangles are congruent, which in our class you'll always be told when you get to geometry, sometimes you have to prove they're congruent. So we're taking baby steps here. We're told these are congruent triangles. So that means that Y corresponds with Q. So angle Y is congruent to angle Q. X corresponds with P. So you'll see they wrote angle X is congruent to angle P. And Z with the three tick marks, those three hash marks, goes with R with the three hash marks. So notice how the red Y and Q only have two hash marks, X and P have one hash mark, Z and R have three. So those are corresponding angles. Now what sides correspond? Well, XY, notice how it has the three hash marks, goes with the side with the three hash marks. So XY goes with PQ, and one hash mark goes with one hash mark. So YZ goes with QR, and the two hash marks with two hash marks. And those are your corresponding parts. If we were going to say that the triangles are congruent, we would say triangle. Now the first one you can name it any way you want to, and I usually name them in alphabetical order. So triangle XYZ, but be careful, that doesn't mean the second one is in alphabetical order. Triangle XYZ is congruent. X corresponds with P, so I need to say P first, and Y correspond with Q, so PQR. So those were in alphabetical order too. Usually they are, but you can't be guaranteed. Sometimes they try to trick us. So for this example problem, name the corresponding parts in the congruent triangles. So they're telling us the triangles are congruent. Well, let's look at what we know. There's a right angle and there's a right angle. So angle N corresponds or is congruent to angle V. R has two hash marks. Z has two hash marks. So angle R is congruent or corresponds with angle Z, and one hash mark, so angle Q corresponds with angle S. Next, we need to list corresponding sides and be very careful. There are three hash marks here and three hash marks there. So the blue and the green angles, or the right angle and the one hash mark, NQ. So it's going to correspond with the blue and the green, or the one hash mark and the right angle, which is SV, and I wrote angle, and I meant to say segment. So that's going to be segment SV. And next we'll look for the 2 hash marks. So NR is congruent to VZ. And then last, the only one we have left is side RQ. And RQ corresponds with SV. And I didn't necessarily write those in alphabetical order. It's not that important. All right. Oh, and ultimately, what do we want to say? Triangle. If I say LMNOPQRS, so it's in alphabetical order. If I say NQR is congruent to triangle, be careful, N I listed first, so you have to list V first. Q was the 1 hash mark, so it'll be VS, and last would be Z. So see how the first one, if I do it in alphabetical order, the second one is not necessarily in alphabetical order. All right, for this next problem, they did not provide a picture. They just said, complete the statement, and they told us about these 2 triangles being congruent. I already know that D should correspond with P, and F should correspond with W, and H corresponds with Z. So if you have colored pencils or highlighters, you might want to get those out. So angle F is congruent to angle W. And I know that based on the way that it's listed. Why? Because corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, and they are listed in the corresponding order, just like we were careful to say our angles in the right order. If they've told it to us in this way, they've given us a congruency statement, I know how to match them up. So P, they're giving us the second, a corner of the second triangle. Well, P goes with D. I had that in red, so I'll go ahead and keep my colors coordinated. But then when I get to the segments, I can't keep up with the colors. DH, D is the first and the last term of the first triangle. So I need to list the first and the last term of the second triangle. So I'll say PZ. If you want to draw 2 triangles, you can do that, and it might help you to match them up. So practice it without drawing the triangles first, but the more you'll see these other problems have pictures. So if you need a picture, always feel free, easy for me to say, to draw a picture. Now ZW, notice how they said it backwards, ZW. Okay, well then I'm going to say HF. The order is not as important on segments. HF, because I said ZW, I'll say segment HF. All right, I'm going to do a couple of I'll do 2 of the problems at the bottom, and I'm going to leave you to also try. We're trying to solve for x, trying to find the value of x for the congruent triangles. So they're telling us they're congruent. I can see that B corresponds with G and D corresponds with E. So EG is the X, and it's between the right angle and the 1 hash mark. So between the right angle and the 1 hash mark is 24. So I can quickly say X must be 24, and I don't know what our unit of measure is. If you want to say 24 units, you can, but I would accept 24 since I didn't give you what we're measuring in. For number 6, let me change colors. I'm looking for X, and it's between the 1 hash mark and the 2 hash marks. So between 1 hash mark and 2 hash marks is the number 12. So X is 12. And that is how easy it is to work with congruent triangles. And I'll leave 7 and 8 for you to try on your own. I hope that you will bring your questions with you to class tomorrow. Hey, Mia.
Hey, Mom. My boyfriend's name should be Geometry.
Should be what?
Geometry.
Geometry? Why?
He's such a square.
All right, moving on to the next page of this section where we're going to continue to talk about congruent triangles. In this section, we need to talk about how to identify congruent triangles. Two triangles are congruent if and only if all pairs of corresponding angles are congruent and all pairs of corresponding sides are congruent. So we're going to check to see if our angles match up and if our sides match up. So for this first example, it says determine whether the triangles shown are congruent. If so, name the corresponding parts and write a congruency statement. A congruency statement is triangle so and so is congruent to triangle such and such. So we need to look at our information we've been given before we can state our congruency statement. So here I see angle C has 3 lines, and so does angle F. So angle C is congruent to angle F. Alright, A has 1 tick mark. You can either change colors or you can just try to pay attention to the markings of the angles. So angle A is congruent, well, my pen's not writing, angle A is congruent to angle D. I'm going to change colors to look at B has 2 tick marks or hash marks. So angle B is congruent to angle E. And then when we're looking at the sides, I have 3 lines, goes with 3 lines. So let's go back to blue. CA is congruent to DF. And with my red pen, I'm going to say 1 hash mark, 1 hash mark. So AB is congruent to DE. And the last one is CB is congruent to FE. So now let's make our congruency statement. Triangle, if I say ABC for the first one, which alphabetical order is what we usually do, but it's not required. If I say A corresponded with D. I'm looking at my list here, but you could also look at your markings. A goes with D. Angle B goes with angle E. B and E correspond. And C corresponded with F. So A, B, C goes with D, F. We've named our corresponding parts in corresponding order. Let's take another look at this one. Instead of hash marks, now we have measurements. 8 millimeters, 8 millimeters, 12 millimeters. Oh, I don't have 12 millimeters. Wait a minute. Also, when I look for another 9 millimeter, there's not another 9 millimeter. So the best thing to say about these two triangles, are they congruent? They are not congruent. So you can either write the word not congruent, or you can use the abbreviation, which all mathematicians prefer. Okay, so here are there's only two exercises for you to try. See if you can determine if these triangles are congruent. Remember, you have all the information you need to find out it does X equal Y. All angles of triangles add up to be 180 degrees. Don't forget you know that. So find X and find Y, and if they're equal, then check out all your sides and see if corresponding sides are also congruent. Back over to number 1, don't forget that if they're sharing this side in common, then that side, if you pulled the two triangles apart, let me do that for you right here. You have T, N, W, and the other triangle, when you pull it apart, is W, N, I. And I did a bad job of drawing those triangles, but we have 2 tick marks here and 2 here, 1 here and 1 there. And I just put an X on the side that they share. So please don't forget that WN is equal to itself when you pull the two triangles apart. So I'll let you finish filling in the angle marks and let me know tomorrow if you thought those two triangles in number 1 or number 2 are congruent. And if they are, don't forget to write a congruency statement. That means tell me triangle so-and-so is congruent to triangle such and such. So if they are congruent, then write the congruency statement. If they're not congruent, then you can write the names of the triangles and you can put a hash line through them. But don't think that they're not congruent just because I said that. Okay? because they might just both be congruent. All right, have a super day.